On the edge of a dying star system, where light barely reached and hope was even scarcer, lay Kalos 9, a planet so deadly it earned the nickname Deathworld. Its skies were perpetually choked with ash storms, its surface riddled with jagged mountains and rivers of molten lava. Yet humanity had carved out a fragile existence here, building domed colonies to shield themselves from the planet's wrath. These domes were their sanctuaries, their last bastions against extinction. Life inside the domes was harsh but predictable. People worked long hours mining rare minerals that made Kalos 9 valuable enough for Earth's corporations to bother with such a hostile place. Children played in cramped quarters while adults whispered about the dangers outside, the venomous creatures, the toxic air, and the endless darkness. But no one spoke of what happened after sunset. Not anymore. It started as a faint hum, almost imperceptible beneath the constant whirring of machinery. At first, people thought it was just another glitch in the aging equipment, or perhaps the wind howling through cracks in the dome's walls. But then it grew louder. Every night, without fail, the sound came again. A low, mournful cry that seemed to echo from somewhere deep within the planet itself. It wasn't mechanical. It didn't belong to any animal they knew. It was something else. Captain Rhea Voss stood at the edge of Dome Alpha's control room, staring out at the bleak landscape beyond the reinforced glass. She was tall and lean, her face lined with years of stress and responsibility. As leader of Kalos 9's defense fleet, she'd seen plenty of strange things during her tenure, but nothing like this. The cry unnerved her more than she cared to admit. Still nothing. She asked over her shoulder, addressing Lieutenant Dax, who sat hunched over a console littered with blinking lights and scrolling data. "Nope," Dax replied, his voice tinged with frustration. "Whatever it is, it's not registering on our sensors. Could be atmospheric interference, though." Rhea frowned. Atmospheric interference doesn't sound like someone screaming. Dax glanced up at her, his brow furrowing. "You think it's alive?" Before she could answer, an alarm blared through the room. Both turned sharply toward the screen displaying live feeds from the colony's perimeter cameras. One by one, the images flickered and went black. Then came the reports flooding in from across the settlement, livestock collapsing dead in their pens, power grids failing intermittently, and settlers claiming they heard voices whispering their names. Panic spread quickly. Some colonists barricaded themselves indoors, praying the sound would pass. Others gathered in groups, clutching makeshift weapons and muttering prayers to gods they weren't sure existed. Rumors flew faster than the ash storms outside. Some said it was a curse brought on by disturbing sacred ground. Others believed it was a signal from aliens trying to communicate, or worse, invade. Rhea refused to let fear dictate her actions. Gathering a small team, she ordered them to investigate the source of the cry. They suited up in heavy exoskeleton armor designed to withstand Kalos 9's brutal conditions and ventured into the wasteland. The moment they stepped outside, the cry hit them full force, not just audible now, but visceral, vibrating through their bones like a warning. Their destination was a series of caverns located miles away from the colony. According to old survey maps, these caves descended deep into the planet's crust, far below anything humans had ever explored. As they approached, the ground trembled beneath their boots, and the air grew colder despite the heat radiating from nearby lava flows. Something was waiting for them down there. Something ancient, something angry. When they finally entered the mouth of the largest cavern, the cry became deafening. Shadows danced along the walls, cast by strange bioluminescent patterns glowing faintly in the darkness. The shapes pulsed rhythmically, almost hypnotically, matching the cadence of the sound. Rhea raised a hand, signaling her team to stop. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized they weren't alone. "What do we do now?" one of her crew members whispered, his voice trembling. Rhea tightened her grip on her weapon. "We find out what's making that noise." But as they moved deeper into the abyss, the truth began to reveal itself. and it was far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The cavern swallowed them whole, its jagged mouth yawning like a predator ready to devour its prey. Captain Rhea Voss led her team cautiously, her boots crunching against the uneven ground littered with sharp rocks and strange, glass-like shards that glinted faintly in their helmet lights. The air was thick and stale, carrying an acrid smell that made it hard to breathe even through their filters. Above them, the glowing patterns on the walls pulsed in sync with the cry, a sound so loud now that it felt alive, pressing against their eardrums and rattling their bones. "This place feels wrong," muttered Corporal Jace, his voice tight with unease. He adjusted the grip on his rifle, his eyes darting nervously at every shadow. "Like it's watching us." "It is watching us," Rhea replied sharply, though she couldn't shake the same feeling crawling up her spine. Her instincts screamed danger, but they had no choice. If this cry was causing chaos back at the colony, they needed answers, and fast. As they ventured deeper, the bioluminescent patterns grew brighter, forming intricate designs that seemed almost deliberate. They weren't random shapes. They looked like symbols, etched into the stone by something far older than humanity. Some of the markings resembled claws or teeth, while others formed spirals and loops that defied logic. Rhea paused to snap photos with her wrist-mounted camera, hoping someone back at the colony could decipher their meaning. Then they found the ruins. The cavern opened into a massive chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. Scattered across the floor were remnants of structures, crumbling towers, shattered archways, and slabs of blackened metal fused with organic material. It wasn't human-made. Whatever civilization had built this place had long since vanished, leaving behind only fragments of their existence. "Look at this," whispered Lieutenant Dax, kneeling beside what appeared to be a skeleton half buried in the debris. But it wasn't entirely bone. It was part machined, too. Metal tendrils coiled around ribs, wires sprouting from sockets where eyes should have been. The skull grinned up at them, empty yet accusing. Rhea knelt beside him, her gloved fingers brushing against the remains. "These aren't just tools," she murmured. "They're integrated, like they became one with their technology." Before anyone could respond, Private Mira let out a strangled gasp. She stood frozen near the edge of the chamber, staring at something beyond the light of their helmets. When the others turned to look, they saw movement, shapes shifting in the shadows, too large to be natural, too fluid to be mechanical. And then came the sound, a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the cavern. "Stay close," Rhea barked, raising her weapon. "Don't fire unless you have a clear shot." But before they could react further, the cry intensified, louder than ever before. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was pain, despair, rage. Mira clutched her head, dropping to her knees as tears streamed down her face. "Make it stop," she sobbed. "Please, make it stop." And then she was gone. 1 second she was there, trembling on the ground. The next, the shadows surged forward, swallowing her whole. The team fired blindly into the darkness, but the shapes dissolved like smoke, leaving no trace of Mira, or whatever had taken her. "We need to move. Now," Rhea shouted, grabbing Dax by the arm and dragging him toward the exit. The rest followed, adrenaline overriding fear as the cry echoed behind them, taunting them with whispers of doom. Back outside, safe within the confines of their armored vehicle, they tried to process what had happened. Mira's disappearance weighed heavily on all of them, but it was her final words, delivered in a monotone voice over their comms, that chilled them to the core. "The Devourer is awake." By the time Captain Rhea Voss and her team returned to Dome Alpha, panic had reached a fever pitch. The cry was no longer confined to the caverns. It seeped into the colony itself, audible even through the reinforced walls of the domes. Settlers huddled together in dimly lit corridors, clutching makeshift weapons or praying silently as the sound reverberated around them. Some claimed it spoke directly to their minds, whispering promises of salvation or threats of annihilation. Others swore they saw shadows moving where none should exist. Rhea wasted no time reporting what they'd found in the caverns, the ruins, the skeletal remains fused with machinery, and Mira's disappearance. But when she mentioned the cry growing louder and more aggressive, skepticism met her words. Many dismissed it as stress-induced paranoia. After all, how could a sound be dangerous? They don't understand, Dax muttered under his breath as they left the briefing room. We didn't just hear it. We felt it. It's not natural. No one wants to believe something like that exists, Rhea replied grimly. But we need proof if we're going to convince them. This isn't some freak storm or equipment malfunction. Determined to uncover answers, Rhea turned to the artifacts they'd recovered from the ruins. Fragments of alien symbols etched onto stone tablets and shards of metallic material that glowed faintly in the dark. She enlisted the help of Dr. Elara Quinn, the colony's resident xenolinguist, who specialized in deciphering unknown languages. Together, they pored over the symbols for hours, piecing together fragments of meaning. It's not just writing, it's instructions, Elara said finally, pointing at one set of markings. This section repeats itself over and over. It's describing a summoning. A summoning? Rhea asked, leaning closer. Yes, something powerful enough to destroy entire civilizations, or save them. Elara hesitated before adding, and there's more. These symbols here, they reference ships, living ships. Before Rhea could press further, alarms blared throughout the dome. Outside, drones sent to patrol the perimeter were being torn apart by massive tentacled creatures emerging from the ground. Surveillance footage showed the beasts, part machine, part organism, ripping through metal and flesh alike with terrifying efficiency. Their bodies shimmered unnaturally, shifting forms as though adapting mid-attack. The colony erupted into chaos. Families scrambled to evacuate to safer sections of the dome, while engineers worked frantically to reinforce defenses. Rhea ordered her fleet to mobilize, but the biomechanical horrors were unlike anything they'd faced before. Conventional weapons barely scratched their surfaces, and worse, pilots reported hearing the cry inside their helmets during combat. Hallucinations plagued them, visions of loved ones screaming, of endless voids pulling them downward. Desperate for solutions, Rhea revisited the artifacts. One piece, a jagged shard of glowing metal, reacted violently when exposed to recordings of the cry. It emitted a pulse that silenced the sound momentarily, causing the attacking creatures to falter. Realization dawned on her face. These things, they're extensions of whatever made that cry, she told Dax. They're not just animals. They're weapons, and the cry is controlling them. Her revelation came too late. As night fell over Kalos 9, the attacks intensified. The biomechanical leviathans breached the outer walls of Dome Beta, flooding the settlement with ash and toxic air. Hundreds perished within minutes. Survivors begged Rhea for answers, but she knew the truth would only deepen their despair. Humanity wasn't fighting an enemy. It was facing extinction. Unless she acted quickly, the colony wouldn't survive another day. The situation was spiraling out of control. Dome Beta had fallen, its shattered remains spewing ash and debris into the already toxic atmosphere. Refugees poured into Dome Alpha, their faces streaked with soot and tears, their voices hoarse from screaming. Captain Rhea Voss stood in the command center, her hands gripping the edge of a console as she stared at live feeds, showing the biomechanical horrors tearing through the colony's defenses. These creatures weren't just attacking. They were probing, learning, adapting. Every attempt to stop them only made them stronger. "We can't keep this up," muttered Lieutenant Dax, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "They're overwhelming us." Rhea didn't respond immediately. Her mind raced, piecing together everything they'd learned so far. The ruins, the artifacts, the cry, and now these monstrous hybrids. She thought about the shard that had silenced the cry temporarily, how it seemed to disrupt the creature's coordination. If they could amplify its effect, maybe, just maybe, they could turn the tide. But doing so would require deploying weapons humanity hadn't used in decades, the Erebus-class dreadnoughts. These ships were relics of an older era, designed for total war against enemies too dangerous to confront head-on. They carried enough firepower to level cities, but came with risks. Once unleashed, there was no guarantee they wouldn't attract retaliation from whatever force controlled the biomechanical leviathans. "Prepare the Erebus fleet," Rhea ordered, turning to face her crew. Gasps rippled through the room. "Captain, are you sure?" asked Dr. Elara Quinn, stepping forward. "Those ships are unpredictable. If we use them here, we risk exposing the entire colony." "I know the risks," Rhea snapped, her tone sharp but resolute. "But if we don't act now, there won't be a colony left to protect." Reluctantly, the team began preparations. The Erebus fleet consisted of 3 massive vessels, each bristling with plasma cannons, missile arrays, and experimental EMP generators capable of disabling entire grids. Their hulls gleamed ominously under the dim red lights of the hangar bay, their engines humming like caged beasts eager to break free. As the ships launched into orbit above Kalos 9, Rhea joined the battle personally aboard the flagship, Erebus Prime. From high above, the devastation below was horrifyingly clear. Entire sections of the domes were crumbling, swallowed by swarms of biomechanical creatures. The largest among them, a towering monstrosity with writhing tentacles and glowing eyes, loomed over Dome Alpha, preparing to strike. "Target the big one first," Rhea commanded, her voice steady despite the knot of fear tightening in her chest. "If we take it down, the others might scatter." The Erebus fleet opened fire, unleashing a barrage of plasma bolts and missiles that lit up the darkened sky. For a moment, it seemed like they had the upper hand. The giant creature staggered, its metallic hide scorched and cracked. But then something unexpected happened. It split apart, dividing into smaller versions of itself, each just as deadly as the original. "What the hell is going on?" shouted Dax, staring at the monitors in disbelief. "They're evolving," Rhea realized, her stomach sinking. "Every attack makes them smarter, stronger. We're playing right into their hands." Pilots began reporting strange symptoms, headaches, hallucinations, even voices whispering inside their helmets. One pilot suddenly veered off course, ramming his ship directly into a leviathan before exploding in a burst of flames. Another screamed over comms about seeing his dead family aboard his ship moments before losing control. Despite the chaos, Rhea noticed something crucial. The creatures weren't attacking randomly. They moved with purpose, almost as though searching for something specific. Her gaze fell on the artifact sitting on the console beside her. Could it be linked? Was it calling to them? Before she could dwell on it further, another wave of leviathans surged toward the fleet. Outnumbered and outmatched, Rhea clenched her fists. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a test of humanity's will to endure. And failure was not an option. The battle raged above Kalos 9, a chaotic dance of destruction between humanity's deadliest ships and the biomechanical leviathans. Plasma bolts streaked across the void like fiery comets, illuminating the dark expanse with bursts of light. The Erebus-class dreadnoughts fired relentlessly, their cannons roaring as they unleashed salvos of missiles and energy beams. Yet for every blow landed, the enemy adapted, regenerating wounds, shifting forms, and retaliating with terrifying precision. Captain Rhea Voss stood on the bridge of Erebus Prime, her jaw clenched as she watched the tactical display. Each red dot representing a leviathan seemed to multiply faster than her fleet could destroy them. Worse still, the creatures weren't just attacking blindly. They moved in patterns, almost as if communicating with one another. Every time the Erebus fleet targeted one group, another flanked them from behind, forcing retreats and costly maneuvers. "They're learning," muttered Lieutenant Dax, his fingers flying over the controls as he tried to recalibrate targeting systems. "Every shot we fire teaches them how to counter us." Rhea didn't respond immediately, Her eyes narrowed as she studied the movements of the largest Leviathan, a hulking monstrosity covered in writhing tentacles and glowing veins that pulsed in sync with the cry. It wasn't leading the charge, but instead hung back, observing. Its behavior reminded her of something, or someone, directing the chaos from afar. "Focus all firepower on that one," Rhea ordered, pointing at the massive creature. "It's not fighting. It's commanding." Her crew hesitated. Diverting resources to a single target risked leaving other ships vulnerable. But Rhea's instincts screamed urgency. If they could take out the leader, the rest might falter. The Erebus fleet obeyed, concentrating their attacks on the towering Leviathan. Plasma bolts tore through its armored hide, exposing pulsating organs beneath. For a moment, it seemed like victory was within reach. Then the unthinkable happened. The creature split apart again, dividing into smaller versions of itself. Each fragment retained the intelligence and aggression of the original, spreading across the battlefield like wildfire. Panic rippled through the fleet. Pilots reported hallucinations worsening, visions of loved ones begging for help, voices whispering secrets only they could know. One pilot suddenly veered off course, screaming about hearing the cry inside his helmet before self-destructing his ship. Another abandoned formation entirely, muttering about the devourer moments before being engulfed by a swarm of leviathans. Amidst the chaos, Rhea noticed something peculiar. The artifact she'd brought aboard, the jagged shard of glowing metal, reacted violently whenever the cry intensified. It pulsed brighter, emitting waves of energy that briefly disrupted the Leviathan's coordination. She grabbed it, holding it up to study its glow more closely. A thought struck her. "Dax, scan this thing," she said sharply, handing him the shard. "I want to know everything it's doing when the cry gets louder." Dax worked quickly, connecting the artifact to the ship's sensors. Data flooded the screens, revealing patterns that matched the Leviathan's movements. "It's resonating with them," he said, his voice tinged with awe. "This thing, it's part of whatever controls them." Rhea's mind raced. If the artifact could disrupt the cry, maybe it could also reveal the source. She turned back to the tactical display, her gaze locking onto the retreating fragments of the giant Leviathan. They weren't scattering randomly. They were converging toward a specific point near Kalos 9's core. "They're not just attacking us," Rhea realized aloud. "They're searching for something. Something buried deep underground." Before she could elaborate, alarms blared throughout the ship. A fresh wave of leviathans surged forward, surrounding the Erebus fleet. Outnumbered and running low on ammunition, the situation looked dire. But Rhea refused to give up. Clutching the artifact tightly, she made a decision. "We need to lure them closer," she said, her voice steady despite the storm around her. "Use the artifact as bait. If we can get close enough to scan one of those things, we might find a way to stop them." Her crew exchanged uneasy glances, but nodded in agreement. With no other options left, they prepared for the most dangerous maneuver of their lives, one that would bring them face to face with an enemy unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. The plan was risky, suicidal, even. But Captain Rhea Voss knew they had no other choice. The Erebus fleet's resources were dwindling, and the biomechanical leviathans showed no signs of slowing down. If humanity was to survive, they needed answers, and fast. Using the artifact as bait seemed like their only hope. "All right, listen up," Rhea said, addressing her crew over the comms. Her voice was calm but carried an edge of steel. "We're going to split into two teams. One will stay behind to draw their attention while the other gets close enough to scan one of those things. Once we have data, we regroup and fall back." Lieutenant Dax frowned, his hands hovering over the controls. "Captain, splitting our forces now is suicide. We're barely holding them off as it is." "I know," Rhea replied sharply, meeting his gaze. "But if we don't figure out what makes these things tick, none of us are making it out alive anyway. Trust me on this." Reluctantly, the crew began preparations. Two ships peeled away from the main formation, creating a diversion by launching decoy drones and firing wildly at the advancing Leviathans. The rest of the fleet held position, buying time for Erebus Prime to slip through the chaos undetected. Clutching the glowing shard tightly, Rhea guided her ship toward the largest cluster of enemies, her heart pounding with every passing second. As they approached, the artifact pulsed brighter, its energy resonating with the cry that filled the airwaves. The Leviathans reacted immediately, turning their attention toward Erebus Prime. Their movements became erratic, almost frantic, as though drawn to the shard like moths to a flame. Sensors lit up with activity as the ship's scanners worked overtime, collecting data on the creature's composition, behavior, and connection to the artifact. "We've got something," shouted Dr. Elara Quinn, who had joined the mission to analyze the readings. She pointed at a screen displaying complex patterns of energy signatures. "These things, they're not just machines or animals. They're extensions of a single hive mind." "A hive mind?" Rhea asked, her brow furrowing. "Yes, and it's located deep within Kalos 9's core. That's why they're converging there. They're protecting it." Before Rhea could respond, the Leviathans launched a coordinated assault. Plasma blasts rocked the ship, sending sparks flying across the bridge. Alarms blared as systems overloaded, and the crew scrambled to keep Erebus Prime airborne. Outside, smaller ships from the fleet engaged the enemy in a desperate bid to buy more time. "Captain, we can't hold them off much longer," Dax yelled, his face pale with strain. "They're breaking through." Rhea clenched her fists, weighing their options. They had enough data to confirm the hive mind's location, but extracting it would require reaching the planet's core. Getting there meant navigating a labyrinth guarded by untold horrors, not to mention surviving long enough to attempt the journey. "Set coordinates for re-entry," she ordered grimly. "We're heading back to the surface." "What about the fleet?" Elara asked, her voice trembling. "They'll do what they have to," Rhea replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We've got a job to finish." As Erebus Prime descended toward Kalos 9, the remaining ships fought valiantly to cover their retreat. Explosions lit up the sky as vessels were torn apart, their crews sacrificing themselves to ensure Rhea's survival. Tears welled in her eyes as she watched the feeds, knowing the cost of their bravery. When the ship finally broke through the atmosphere, Rhea turned to her team. "This isn't just about saving ourselves anymore. It's about stopping whatever's down there before it destroys everything we've built. Are you with me?" One by one, her crew nodded, determination hardening their faces. They didn't know what awaited them beneath the planet's crust, but they were ready to face it, no matter the cost. The descent into Kalos 9's abyss was anything but smooth. Erebus Prime shuddered violently as it pierced through layers of ash clouds and toxic storms, its hull groaning under the strain. Captain Rhea Voss gripped the armrests of her command chair, her knuckles white as she stared at the swirling chaos outside. Lightning crackled across the sky, illuminating jagged mountains and rivers of molten lava below. It felt like the planet itself was resisting their return. "We're coming in too fast," shouted Lieutenant Dax from his station, his hands flying over the controls. "If we don't stabilize soon, we'll tear apart on impact. Fire retro thrusters now." Rhea barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. The ship jolted as engines roared to life, slowing their descent just enough to avoid disaster. Moments later, they landed hard in a clearing near the cavern entrance where everything had begun. As the crew disembarked, the artifact pulsed faintly in Rhea's hand, guiding them deeper into the labyrinth. The bioluminescent patterns on the wall seemed brighter this time, almost alive, shifting and writhing as though reacting to their presence. The cry echoed louder than ever, vibrating through their bones and making it hard to think clearly. "This place feels wronger than before," muttered Corporal Jace, his rifle trained on every shadow. "Like it knows we're here." "It probably does," Rhea replied grimly. She glanced down at the shard, its glow intensifying with each step forward. Whatever lay ahead, The artifact wanted them to find it, and that thought filled her with unease. Their journey grew more treacherous with every passing hour. The caverns twisted and turned unpredictably, forcing them to navigate narrow ledges above bottomless chasms. Strange creatures lurked in the darkness, mutated versions of those they'd encountered earlier, larger and smarter thanks to prolonged exposure to the cry. One lunged at them suddenly, its claws scraping against Rhea's armor before she fired point-blank, sending it tumbling into the abyss. But the real horror came when they stumbled upon remnants of human activity, scattered tools, abandoned equipment, even skeletal remains still wearing tattered uniforms. All signs pointed to settlers who had ventured into the caves long ago, never to return. Among the debris, Rhea found something chilling, an old colonial insignia etched into the wall beside crude carvings of the alien symbols. Humanity hadn't chosen Kalos 9 by chance. They'd built their colony atop the burial site of the very beings they were now fighting. "This changes everything," whispered Dr. Elara Quinn, her voice trembling as she examined the markings. "We didn't disturb sacred ground. We woke them up." Before anyone could process the implications, the ground beneath them trembled violently. A deafening roar echoed through the cavern, shaking loose rocks from the ceiling. From the shadows emerged a monstrous creature unlike any they'd seen, a towering hybrid of flesh and metal, its body covered in pulsating veins and jagged spines. Its eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence, locking onto the artifact in Rhea's hand. "It knows what we have," Rhea said, raising her weapon. "Stay close. We're not stopping until we reach the core." The creature charged, forcing the team to scatter. Plasma bolts ricocheted off its armored hide, doing little more than enraging it further. As it swiped at them with razor-sharp claws, the artifact emitted a blinding pulse, momentarily stunning the beast. Seizing the opportunity, Rhea led her team deeper into the abyss, knowing full well that the worst was yet to come. Behind them, the roar faded into silence, but the sense of being hunted only grew stronger. Whatever awaited them at the core, it wasn't going to let them leave alive. The deeper they ventured into the abyss, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Captain Rhea Voss and her team trudged through narrow tunnels that seemed to close in around them, their helmet lights barely piercing the suffocating darkness. The artifact pulsed erratically in Rhea's hand, its glow growing brighter with every step forward. It was as if it were alive, guiding, or perhaps warning, them of what lay ahead. "This place feels like a tomb," muttered Corporal Jace, his voice echoing unnaturally against the walls. His rifle trembled slightly in his grip, though whether from fear or exhaustion, no one could tell. "Like we're walking straight into a grave." "Maybe we are," Rhea replied quietly, her eyes scanning the shifting patterns on the walls. The bioluminescent symbols now writhed violently, pulsing in sync with the cry that reverberated through the cavern. Each pulse sent waves of nausea coursing through her body, making it harder to focus. But she pressed on, driven by a grim determination. Finally, after hours of navigating treacherous terrain, they'd reached the heart of the abyss. A massive chamber illuminated by an eerie blue light emanating from a pool of liquid starlight at its center. Suspended within the glowing substance was a colossal entity unlike anything they had ever seen. Its form defied comprehension, a swirling mass of tendrils, jagged spines, and countless eyes that glowed with cold intelligence. At its core pulsed a radiant orb, radiating energy so intense it made the artifact in Rhea's hand hum violently. "It's beautiful," whispered Dr. Elara Quinn, her voice filled with both awe and terror. She took a hesitant step closer, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. This must be the hive mind, the source of the cry. Before anyone could stop her, Elara reached out toward the pool. In an instant, the entity reacted. Tendrils shot out, wrapping around her arms and pulling her closer. She screamed as the orb flared brightly, flooding her mind with overwhelming sensations, images of destruction, whispers of ancient civilizations consumed by fire, and a single unrelenting command. Leave. Rhea acted quickly, firing a plasma bolt at the tendrils holding Ilara. The shot severed the connection, sending the doctor stumbling backward. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. "It spoke to me," she gasped, clutching her head. "It said, it doesn't want us here." "Well, tough luck for it," Rhea snapped, raising her weapon. "We're not leaving until this thing is dead." The entity roared, a sound so deafening it nearly knocked them off their feet. The chamber shook violently as smaller tendrils erupted from the walls, snaking toward the intruders. The team opened fire, but the tendrils regenerated almost instantly, forcing them to retreat further into the chamber. "You can't destroy me," came a voice, not in their ears, but directly in their minds. It was calm yet menacing, laced with centuries of malice. "I am eternal. I am the Devourer." Rhea gritted her teeth, refusing to back down. "Then we'll see how eternal you are when your core goes up in flames." She activated the artifact's self-destruct sequence, its glow intensifying to blinding levels. The Devourer recoiled, clearly unsettled by the shard's energy. But it wasn't going to let them win without a fight. Waves of drones poured into the chamber, each one a miniature version of the monstrous entity. They swarmed the team, forcing them to split up to survive. "Hold them off," Rhea shouted over the chaos. "I need 2 minutes to plant the charges." Her crew fought valiantly, sacrificing themselves one by one to buy her time. As she worked, tears streamed down her face, not from fear, but from grief. These were her people, her responsibility, and now they were dying for a mission that might still fail. When the last charge was set, Rhea triggered the countdown. The Devourer let out a final, ear-splitting scream as the chamber began collapsing around them. With seconds to spare, Rhea sprinted toward the exit, the artifact clutched tightly in her hand. Behind her, the abyss swallowed itself whole. But the Devourer's voice lingered in her mind, a chilling promise. "I will return." The ground shook violently as Captain Rhea Voss sprinted toward the cavern's exit, her lungs burning and legs aching from exhaustion. Behind her, the chamber housing the Devourer collapsed in on itself, sending shockwaves rippling through the labyrinthine tunnels. Rocks tumbled from the ceiling, narrowly missing her as she pushed herself harder than ever before. The artifact in her hand pulsed wildly, its energy spiking with each passing second. It was as if it knew time was running out, for both the Devourer and humanity. "Captain, move faster." Lieutenant Dax shouted over the comms, his voice strained but resolute. He and the remnants of her team were waiting just outside the cavern entrance, holding off waves of biomechanical creatures that had been drawn to the chaos. Their weapons blazed nonstop, cutting down enemies only for more to take their place. "We can't hold them much longer." "I'm almost there." Rhea yelled back, gritting her teeth as she leaped over a fallen boulder. Her armor scraped against jagged edges, but she didn't slow down. Every second counted. If she didn't make it out in time, all their sacrifices would be for nothing. As she emerged into the open air, the sight nearly stopped her in her tracks. The sky above Kalos 9 was ablaze with fire, streaks of plasma lighting up the horizon, as the Erebus fleet fought desperately to cover their escape. Below, the biomechanical leviathans swarmed like locusts, tearing apart anything that moved. Dome Alpha, the last bastion of human life on the planet, was already crumbling under their assault. Refugees spilled out into the toxic wasteland, choking on ash and despair. Dax grabbed her arm the moment she reached him, pulling her behind cover. "What now?" he demanded, reloading his rifle with shaking hands. "Did you destroy it?" Rhea hesitated, glancing at the artifact. Its glow had dimmed slightly, but it still hummed with latent energy. "I planted explosives around the core," she said grimly, "but I don't think it's enough. The Devourer, it's too powerful." Dax cursed under his breath. "Then what do we do? We've got maybe minutes before those things overrun us completely." Rhea's mind raced. They needed something bigger, something capable of wiping out not just the Leviathans, but whatever remained of the Devourer's influence. Then it hit her. The artifact wasn't just a key to disrupting the cry, it was a beacon. And if they could amplify its signal. "We use this," she said, holding up the shard. "It's our only chance." Without waiting for approval, she transmitted coordinates to the Erebus fleet, ordering them to focus all remaining firepower on the planet's surface. The plan was insane. A full-scale bombardment risked obliterating any survivors still clinging to life. But staying meant certain death anyway. She gave them 30 seconds to evacuate before unleashing hell. "Get everyone clear," Rhea shouted to her team. "Now." They scrambled to herd the remaining settlers toward Erebus Prime, which hovered nearby, engines roaring as it prepared for immediate departure. Explosions rocked the ground as the fleet unleashed everything they had left. Plasma cannons, EMP bursts, and missile salvos raining down like Judgment Day. The ground cracked and splintered beneath the onslaught, swallowing entire sections of the colony whole. Inside the ship, Rhea watched the destruction unfold on the monitors, her heart heavy with loss. This wasn't victory, it was survival. But even as the planet fractured and burned, she couldn't shake the feeling that the Devourer's voice still lingered somewhere in the void, waiting for its next opportunity. When the dust settled, silence reigned. For now, the view from Erebus Prime's observation deck was apocalyptic. Kalos 9, once a desolate but survivable Deathworld, was now a shattered husk, a fractured planet consumed by fire and ash. Rivers of molten lava spilled across its surface, glowing ominously against the darkened sky. The bombardment had done its job. The biomechanical Leviathans were gone, reduced to smoldering ruins along with everything else. But as Captain Rhea Voss stared at the devastation below, she felt no sense of triumph, only an overwhelming weight of loss. "We saved them," Lieutenant Dax said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice lacked conviction, heavy with exhaustion and grief. "Didn't we?" Rhea didn't answer immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on the dying world beneath them, her mind replaying every decision that had led to this moment. Thousands of lives lost, entire families wiped out, a colony built on hope and perseverance reduced to rubble. Was it worth it? She wanted to believe so, but doubt gnawed at her like a festering wound. "Survival isn't victory," she finally replied, her tone hollow. "It's just survival." Behind her, the remaining crew shuffled awkwardly, their faces pale and drawn. They were battered, bruised, and haunted by memories they would carry for the rest of their lives. Some clutched photographs of loved ones who hadn't made it onto the ship in time. Others simply stared blankly at the floor, unable to process what they'd endured. Among them was Dr. Elara Quinn, her hands trembling as she held the artifact, the shard that had guided them through hell and back. Its glow had faded almost entirely, leaving behind only faint traces of energy. "What happens now?" Elara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think it's really over?" Rhea turned to face her, her expression unreadable. "I don't know," she admitted, "but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that things like the Devourer don't die easily. If anything's left of it out there." She trailed off, glancing toward the endless expanse of space beyond the viewport. "We'll have to be ready." As the fleet limped away from Kalos 9, heading toward a distant system where humanity might rebuild, the artifact emitted one final pulse. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a soft flicker of light that went unnoticed by most. But Rhea saw it. For a brief moment, the shard seemed to hum faintly, as though responding to something far away. Then it fell silent, cold and inert in Elara's hands. For days, the survivors aboard Erebus Prime spoke little, each lost in their own thoughts. Some prayed for peace, while others feared what horrors might await them next. Humanity had survived, yes, but at what cost? And how long could they keep running before something caught up to them again? In the quiet hours of the night, when the ship's corridors were empty and the stars stretched endlessly outside. Rhea often found herself staring at the artifact. Though it was lifeless now, she couldn't shake the feeling that it still held secrets, secrets about the Devourer, about the ancient civilization buried beneath Kalos 9, and perhaps even about humanity's place in the cosmos. One evening, as she stood alone in the dimly lit storage bay, the artifact suddenly pulsed once more, a single faint vibration that sent chills down her spine. Somewhere, deep in the vastness of space, another cry began to echo. And this time, it wasn't alone.